Welcome to Hidden in the Core of Wicca. The question is, what if it turned out that the Wiccan ritual format was modeled on an ancient powerful myth? Now, I'll be honest with you, I had not run into this. I didn't expect to run into this, but that is what it appears I've run into. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the Wiccan format, but it's an order of operations. It's like if you were to go to a wedding or if you were to go to a graduation, they have a certain format, an order in which things are done. The Wiccan ritual format is like that. And what we're saying is that it follows and adheres to this myth. It's like a recipe. I want to begin with the well-documented history of Wicca. And why is that? It's because this stuff we know, this stuff that I'm going to be presenting, it's got to circle around and enter into this body of information. And that's because it has to have a point of transmission. In the founders of Wicca, this myth has to be introduced to them in a way that it is credible enough that, yes, and the founders of Wicca would have taken it and said, hey, I'm going to model the Wiccan ritual format after this. So down here, we have in the green circle a whole host of influences on Wicca. And we're not going to be discussing those today, even though they are wonderful and very rich. We're going to look up here in the top because this is where the point of transmission is going to be. It's going to be things such as the Key of Solomon, which was translated by Mathers. He's a founder of the Golden Dawn. And we know that Gerald Gardner, he had that in his library. The Golden Dawn, Gerald Gardner was never a member, but he did have all 3 volumes of the Golden Dawn's material as published by Israel Regardie in his library. Freemasons. Gerald Gardner was a Mason, and he was initiated into the Masons when he was 25. Aleister Crowley, he was very influential on Gerald Gardner. And in fact, Aleister Crowley initiated him into the OTO in 1947. And this is after Gardner had followed his works for several years. He also met up with Rosicrucians, and that's that bit up there. The transmission is going to come through there. Here's a bunch of information about the history of the Masons. And what the salient points are that you're going to need to know to follow the plot is A, in the 12th to the 16th centuries, they were Masons. They built buildings and cathedrals. In the 1600s, the cathedral business kind of took a dive. There wasn't so many being built. And so they started to boost their membership. They started taking in non-Masons. And when they did that, they started focusing on what's called speculative Masonry. It has to do with meaning and purpose and philosophy. Okay, so then they became more philosophy-based, and they're kind of like a mystery tradition, like the Orphic mysteries, because they draw on ancient wisdoms, they put them in ceremony and ritual, and their members and participants engage in these rituals to get a deeper meaning and enrich their character. The Rosicrucians. Okay, so the Rosicrucians began in the early 17th century with the publication of a mysterious document that came through and said, aha, we now have these and we have this organization. They were esoteric, we know that. We don't know exactly what they did, but they were esoteric. Down here we have 2 important organizations. One is SRIA, I'm not going to say the long word. They're going to be important because they developed a lot of magical practice, and later magical practitioners would have been a member. Another thing that's important about them is that in order to become a member, you had to be a Mason first. So every single person in SRIA was a Mason. This is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And these first 3 men up here, their founders, all of them were members of the SRIA. They were all Masons. And they also were member of a whole host of other types of magical groups that practice magic. And they brought all of that information into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And what they did there would change the face of Western magic. They were magic on hot sauce. The next person we're going to look at is Aleister Crowley. He was a Mason himself. In fact, he was a 33rd degree Mason. Masonry generally has a 3-degree system, but once you hit that 3rd degree, you can go to other lodges, and then they have more advanced degrees you can participate in. He didn't do the whole thing like most Masons would. He took a trip to Mexico and kind of did them on the sly and fast, but he did have the information. Order Templi Orientis, OTO, and he initiated Gardner into that just before he passed away. So here we have these guys hanging out at the sidebar, and we're just going to park them there and they can have drinks with all the witches while we wait and we get back to them. But we will get back to them. At the very end, we're going to round back to these points. You see that little pair of eyes up there? That is the eyes of the main character of our myth. And I put him up there because every time you see his eyes on the card, that information is going to be in Wicca, and it's also going to be in the myth. It's going to appear in both of them. Also, I'm hopeful. I invite you to look not just for coincidences in the Wiccan ritual format. There's basic underpinnings of magic that support the magic in the Wiccan ritual format that are going to appear in this myth. For instance, in the myth, the main character, he works through layers of reality and puts together layers of reality that all intersect. And in that intersection point, he puts his core working, which is the creation of the universe. In the Wiccan ritual format, we pull together layers of the universe that all intersect in our circle, and we lay our core working down in it. So here's the Wiccan ritual outline. We're not going to count 1, 2, and 3. Those are things that we all do just to get our headspace so that we can be in a place outside of space, in a time outside of time. The story actually starts outside of time. So we don't need to include those. There's the banish over here, which is not Gardnerian. We don't need to find it in there. There's room for it, but we don't need to find it in there. But there will be circles. There will be the equivalent of an elemental blast with pre-existing elements, and invocation of the elements, a taking of them to put them to work to manifest the universe. An invocation of higher powers, gods, in the form of creating the gods. The core working will be laid down into the center of this creation. There will be something suggestive of a great rite, and then Bob's your uncle. We'll have all the parts. Okay, and we will have transmittal. How did I start this journey? I didn't know that I would be finding this, but there is a body of information that I was aware that all of these, they cross and they are influenced and shaped by. It's everything from Kabbalah to Western magical practice, Arabic philosophy, Christianity, the whole shebang. And I thought, well, someday I'm going to have to get to this in order for me to really understand the underpinnings of any of this stuff. So I went at it, and that body of work is Plato. Now, I want to make sure you understand that Plato did not advise or approve of magic. When we look back at what they did back then, we would say, hey, that's magic. They had a different view of what magic is, because they didn't have a separation between science and magic and religion. It was all just pushed together. But he didn't approve of magical practice. He thought it was impious, but that didn't prevent magical practitioners from using his work for the next 2,000 years. So here we are in ancient Greece. Plato's the center, and you can see there's a lot of discussion, a lot of heightened emotions, and what was going on there? Well, the poets, Socratics, and Sophists. Well, the Sophists, they were a group of people that were kind of oriented on making money. They would come in and want to get students and teach them how to debate. They didn't care if their argument had merit. It was just all about winning. Then there were the poets. And when I say poets, I mean like Homer and Hesiod. Those poets, their stories, their myths about the gods, provided a foundation for their whole culture, for their government, for their religion. And so if you mess with those ideas, you're messing with the fabric of their culture. The Socratics were the ones doing the messing. The Socratics, they not all of them really appreciated that the gods were portrayed as so flawed. They wanted to see something a little bit better, a little higher than that, a little more refined, a little more good. So when they got to discussing things, it kind of got a little bit heated. And I'm sure if they could have had epic rap battles, they would have. Here's Socrates, and this is Plato, and this is Plato's student, Aristotle. Socrates was Plato's teacher. When it comes to Plato's things that he wrote, he was very informed by the fact that the state put his teacher to death. He lived to see his teacher put to death. Why? You could say natural causes. He was teaching natural causes. He was teaching other gods. And because of that, and because he would get in the face of the poets, it was considered that he was a bad influence on the youth and he was pretty darn annoying, and they said he had to drink some poison, and there you go. So you'll see that Plato's work makes room for those gods. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that Plato came up with all these ideas himself. There's some really important plot points that happened by pre-Socratics, basically. And they were the scientists of their time. They were the beginning of our science. But you're going to see that there's philosophy and there's religion mixed all the way into everything they did. We're going to go through this really quickly. There's Pythagoras. He was all about, okay, everything in the universe, demons, gods, souls, spirits, the physical universe was made by numbers and math. There is math in this myth. I'm going to warn you, it's scary. Also, math and music are closely related. This is where the harmony of the spheres comes into play. There's also Democritus and his teacher, Leucippus. They actually put forward an idea very similar to atoms. They said that the whole universe, spirits and souls and everything, was made up of tiny particles with space in between, and they moved around a lot, and through this movement things were created and destroyed. You're going to see this appear as the elements later on in Plato's story. And we actually, again, you see the little eyes, this is connected to our work in Wicca. Empedocles. Before Empedocles, there were philosophers who were trying to figure out the universe, and they were saying, well, the universe came from fire, the universe came from water. They weren't saying it was all in union. Empedocles said they were all in union. So you have earth, air, fire, and water, along with this thing called love and strife. How many here are familiar with the concept of love and strife, and that it actually was figured out to go along with the elements? I see that there was one person there.
I took your class last year.
No. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these ideas about love and strife. If you look over here is the pure domain of love. Love, it pulls everything together. Well, what happens if you pull everything together? It turns into a little ball, and you would actually destroy everything through this cosmic power of love and attraction. And over here, you have the pure domain of strife and chaos. If you have ultimate and pure strife, you again have the destruction of the universe. So no life can happen on those, and those can be said to be outside of the physical universe. In the middle is where you have life, the creation of the universe and people. It has been this contention between love and strife where things are pulled together and they make a thing, and then strife comes in and it breaks it apart. And then those things are changed forever, but they go off and join with something else, and new things are created, and then they're destroyed. So you have this cycle of creation and destruction. So over here, this is another way of looking at it. I want you to see this as a polarity. Duality are two separate things. And this isn't two separate things. It is a polarity. It is one thing about the degree of closeness. Imagine that you have the ultimate love and strife that can't exist in the universe, but they're pulling in cosmic forces. These cosmic forces are supercharging this flow zone in between like a magnet. In the middle here, all these little dots are all the things that are caught in that flow of that polarity, and it moves them around. And it creates all this upheaval and change. You can even envision that as like a serpent with two heads. It's both bringing in all this cosmic energy, and everything's flowing through the belly of that serpent, and we're all caught in the middle. It's kind of like that. So Heraclitus, he lived in 500 BC, and he was all about the union of opposites and them being one thing. And so this is all kind of part of the mix. He would give these cryptic phrases like, the road up is the road down. His point is, it's one road. The people on it, they're not the road. They just have a perspective of their travels on the road. So here we have, you see Scooby-Doo, he's got his own mind, and the Jetsons have taken his Scooby snacks. They're going opposite directions, and there's the Batmobile, and the Joker's kind of sidelined that, and here comes Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So there can be a lot of diversity in this polar flow, and that's the point. It creates this rich variety because there's all this caught in that flow. The myth we're looking at is the Timaeus. And it's the only myth he wrote. He wrote lots and lots of things, but what he would do is he would make up a story and there'd be characters. And the characters would talk to each other, and in this dialogue, he would unveil all of his wisdoms in this process of dialectic, he would call it. The Timaeus stands out as the thing he did that is actually a myth. There's one speaker, it's not Socrates. He would pick his teacher to be the main character usually, and this time it's Timaeus. We're going to start the story finally. The story starts out, and Socrates is sitting by himself, and into the room comes three characters, Timaeus, Critias, and Hermocrates. And he says, 1, 2, 3. This is our signal that this is going to be a lot about threes. There's going to be a 3-part circle that is used to create the universe. I'm going to give you that clue. He says, oh, welcome all of you. It's so nice to see you again. Yesterday I told you all these wonderful things, and now it's your turn to tell me all the wonderful stories you want to tell me. This basically means that you have to know the story that he told the other day in order to understand Timaeus. So we have to kind of put them on the sidebar again. They can just have their drinks, because in order to understand Timaeus, you have to understand some things in the Republic. One of the things is going to be the divided line. So up at the top, Plato said there is the good. And the good was this emanating force that was invisible, it was not tangible, it had all the potential of everything that ever could be, but it wasn't, and it just emanated. It's like a light beaming down through here. Underneath this line in the middle, that's the world that is tangible. It's the physical world. In between here, the good and that line, in those emanations, the possibilities of things that are perfect and unchanging start to take definition. They start to become more particular. He called these forms, for a long time they were called ideas, but the Greek word doesn't actually translate into forms or ideas. These were basically like little by little coming to be astral thought form types of things. And he said that the things down here are not as real as the things up here, because these things never change. Everything down here, well, you've got ice cubes one moment, then you have water. Everything is transient. How can you say that something that doesn't stay there forever is more real than the source that emanates them and is the same forever in all eternity? If you look over here, there's some symbols. In how this kind of translates over into the Wiccan ritual format is down here we have an acorn, and that's a tangible thing, and we might work with an acorn in a spell or in a ritual. Way up here, you have the essence, the quintessence, the power that is connected to that acorn, and it could be growth. This vague concept of growth that when you feel it, when you get it in your field or you reach out spiritually, you feel strength. Sometimes you feel strength in people because it becomes embodied in people. It could be big things and small things. It could be abundance, because from one tiny acorn comes a whole forest. Now, there's got to be something to glue them together. If you're going to use this in, say, a spell or a ritual, sometimes we use a visualization. And that is like the astral form. Instead of it being something vague, down here you've got, seeds, something that grows in a forest. And now all of that has emanated energetically down into this acorn to something tangible that we can hold and work with. So how many here have seen The Matrix? Because I'm going to use examples from The Matrix. Excellent. Excellent. Because there's some things that if you compare it to some of the things in The Matrix, it'll become clear really quickly what we're talking about. The Matrix is a Timaeus remake with a Gnostic twist. Plato was saying the source of this is the good. In fact, he called it the good. But later on, there would be Gnostics who said, well, maybe he's not so good. Maybe he's evil. Maybe he's trapped our souls into human bodies, and this is a big old prison. The Matrix was inspired by the Gnostic version of Timaeus. And it has the artificial intelligence called the intelligence, which is also, sometimes Plato calls the good the intelligence. He sends code down to make this digital world that people like Neo think is real. They just are doing their whole lives in this matrix. That's kind of like the good radiating down through the levels. If you compare these two visualizations, here you have the good, here you have the intelligence as the evil demiurge. Down here is Neo. He thinks that this is the reality, the most real reality. But then he takes this pill, which has a code in it. It has computer code. So it has astral information, we could say. And he takes it and it changes him. It transforms him and it frees his mind so that he can see the code for what it is. He can see the astral layer of the matrix. And then because he can see the code, he can reach it. He can manipulate it. He can do magic. Plato would not approve of doing magic. This is another way of expressing the divided line. Here we've got the good, and it's got all the possibilities all moving within it. Below that is, say, a general thing like the idea of safety. This is a higher form. When you get lower, it becomes more particular. It's like a house or a protector. You still can't touch that. That's the idea in your head, all your considerations about that. It's not till you get down here, like my house, my parents' house, Joe the policeman, that is an actual thing you can touch. When I saw that, I thought, well, wait a minute. This is really kind of like the Wiccan ritual circle already. It's just right there. So if you look at the Wiccan ritual circle, and if earth is at the bottom beneath our feet, and if fire is up where the sun is, from here to here, you've got a line of energy. As the fiery, moving, ecstatic, transformative energy of fire moves downward, it becomes more at peace, more at rest, more physical, basically earth. As you move upwards, it loses its shape and form until it could burst into fire. Above that level of fire is quintessence, where something could break its form out and just kind of go off into its astral layer of the universe. How do we access that? What is the glue that helps us move up and down through those layers of reality that we are going to see in the myth? If you combine the water and the air, which is our intellectual, rational self, with the intuitive side of ourself, you get embodied consciousness. And we use our embodied consciousness with our mind, move down and become more grounded and reach towards the tangible, or move upwards towards this level of transformation, more energy, and above that, the quintessence of things. So all of these things, the quintessence, radiate down to the acorn, but here, we're the acorn. We are the thing that spans the heavens and the earth. We are looking at similarities, and I just want to call out that similarities are not transmission. Okay, we're going to look at similarities, but we won't find transmission till later. I also started looking at and thought, well, this actually speaks to the underpinnings of our spells and our rituals. I've trained in 3 covens, and it has always been said you start with the purpose, which is high up here. It's the thing that is closest to the power and the general thing that you're trying to pull that energy down and express it into the ritual space. Right down here, you've got the physicality, which are the items in the ritual. It's the movements, the things that people are doing. So how do you glue all this power-packed energy from here down into the space so that you can make sure that this is imbued down into it? And when you step into it, it's like you're stepping into this matrix of things that you can move and change. And as so goes the ritual circle, so changes the world or the thing outside of it. Well, you've got these mediating layers right here. And he will be using these mediating layers in the myth. Here, we've got what corresponded to air. Well, let's start up higher. We've got purpose, which is very general. It could be like, I want to feel good. I want to feel whole. And maybe you've lost your dog. Right here is the fire of that, the desire. You are extremely motivated to do something. You might even lose sleep. You might even call all your friends in a fit of passion. This is the thing that will take a direction unless you give it a direction. The intent, which is more the air part of it, is what you do that gives that direction. It's the stated intent of the ritual. Down here, you've got the water portion, which is symbolic. That's the part that speaks the deep wells within us that need something that is not so analytical like words or thoughts. You cannot think yourself to some places. You just have to work it in the world of symbols. To glue that together, you might say, okay, I lost my dog, that speaks to this part. What is my intent? And you might think, I didn't like that dog, but I feel lonely and he took up a lot of my time. I want a cat. So you might do a working that has visualizations associated with finding a cat. Or you may say, no, I want my dog. I want my dog. And so you use maybe like the movie Lassie Come Home. And visualizations pulled from that, if that's something that really resonates with you. And you put all this together so this all aligns down into the ritual circle, and you've got representation. And this works for a spell, it works for a ritual, but that's kind of the theory. And this is what we're going to see happening in this myth. In the end, what we have made when we make a ritual space is we've made a device. Basically, we've put all this down here and we're going to step into it, and as so goes this ritual space, so goes things in the real world. And here we've got a little wizard squirrel who brought his acorn in there because the acorn has acornness in it and he wants more acorns. He wants a whole forest of acorns. So he's using that as a focus to summon in all these little acorns from the ether, and he's going to make this manifest. All of these things will show similarity. They don't show where the actual myth meets Gardner. But there has to be a similarity or it doesn't work either. This myth starts in eternity, in a place before time, before space. That is where we start our rituals. Now, the Greeks had a different definition for eternity. Sometimes people think eternity is time, the same thing, or it's a different type of time. The Greeks thought it's opposite. Eternity has nothing to do with time. It is the opposite of time. Time can be measured. You can divide it up on a clock. Eternity, everything is happening. Everything is at one time. It is a state of being with no tomorrow, no yesterday. Those ideas aren't applicable at all. We start our story. Once upon a time, in a time of no time, in a time of no space, where there was only being that was invisible, that was perfect and unchanging and eternal. There was only a brilliant thought, turning and moving and reflecting only upon itself, for there was really nothing else there. It was only itself to reflect on. It was the source of wisdom, but not even wisdom itself. And it was circular, because all perfect things in the Greek world are circular. And there was a sudden surge in its reflections. And in this surge, out splashed the demiurge, who is also called a craftsman. The demiurge, what that means, if you look at its etymology, is works for the people. He's often viewed as the active will of this emanating source, and he's called the craftsman. And he looked upon this emanating source, this grand intelligence, and thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He looked to it and said, "You are so beautiful to me." And he even sang unto him. But nothing came back. And that's because the emanating source can do nothing but constantly reflect upon itself. If it stopped to do something, it would step outside of eternity. It would become a thing. And it's not a becomingness, it's a beingness. The craftsman, the demiurge, he looked at this and he thought, well, I think I'll just make art. You're inspiring. I'm going to make art of you. That was his grand idea. And he decided, I'm going to make an image in your likeness as close to you as I possibly can. But this is going to move and it's going to change by the numbers of time. But here you've got all this physicality and you've got this beautiful intelligence and they are so apart. What am I going to do to stick them together? Well, they'll have to have soul. And I'm going to take this intellect and put it into soul and put the soul into the body. Then this will be alive. And what's more, I won't have to babysit it because it's going to be independent. It'll think for itself. And then he was sad because his idea was kind of broken when he figured out, oh, I can't manifest stuff to make this with. This guy over here can, but I can't. And then he thought, oh, yeah, I know what I'll do. I will go look for stuff, and I'm a craftsman. I will make it. This is where we get our first IKEA moment. He starts talking about necessity, and I bet you've all felt that at IKEA because you get this thing that you're going to assemble, and it's got all these grand ideas and instructions. And then there's the physical universe of some parts are gone or the holes aren't drilled in the right place, but you've got to put this image together with this thing and come up with a thing. He starts talking about necessity, and I was really confused when he started doing that because I thought he's personifying necessity, but there's no story, no backstory. What's this all about? And then I find out that it's actually a cosmic Easter egg back to the Republic, which ends with the myth of Ur. And the myth of Ur was about a man who dies and his body just stays perfectly preserved and his spirit goes up into the cosmos. He's told by a mysterious voice, remember everything and bring it back with you so they know what's up here. What he finds is Ananke. And Ananke is necessity. She has the spindle of necessity. What she personifies is the laws of nature, the unbreakable laws of nature. In the Matrix, she is symbolized by the oracle. In the beginning, when there was nothing, in this story of Ananke, she appears as a serpent with Kronos. They take a look at each other and they think, yeah, you're pretty cool. And there's this cosmic egg and they wrap around it and they wrap around it and they squeeze it tight and it breaks and out comes the physical universe. Because she makes everything, she is the supreme ruler. All the gods, they are subject to her will. So if they ever get into trouble and Ananke comes for them, there's nothing they can do. Not Zeus, not the Titans, none of them. If you look up here, she has this spindle and it's got these rings that go around it. We're going to see these rings again. They're an important part as well as this idea of persuading necessity. That is where we see in those earlier myths also the geocentric universe that's going to be created in Plato's myth. You notice he's minding his P's and Q's. I'm sure he doesn't want to end up like Socrates. So let's go pick up our main character here who's having a drink on the sidebar and continue with our story. In the meantime, he's found a container. This container has very special properties. It's in some places described as empty space. It does have stuff in it. This empty space thing is because outside of it is this emanating source. You have to have a clear space to create something different. If you were to take a candle and walk into the sun, what would happen to that light? It would just be absorbed into nothing. You have to have a clear space for creation. It's also imprintable. It has no characteristics of its own. It's like in the Matrix, it's like the construct room, the white room. So in the Matrix, Morpheus takes Neo into the white room, and this is when he has learned about the code and everything. And Neo says, "What is this room?" And he says, "This is the construct room." And it takes the shape of any of the code that is loaded into it. So you load in the code, and it populates the area. This is very much like our ritual space. When we cast a circle, it doesn't necessarily have a character of its own. It has to be populated with a character. This is the first thing that happens, is this is done with an elemental bless. Inside this vessel are triangular particles, and these are the atoms. The triangular particles are zipping all around, and they're bumping into each other, and they're so chaotic. You couldn't do anything with them. This is where he has to persuade necessity. He has to persuade them into alignment with his purpose. He reaches out his hands, holds the vessel, and into the vessel, he brings forth his power of the intelligence. And he aligns them to his purpose. He persuades them into an alignment with his purpose. And then they're ready. He doesn't do anything. But basically, the white room has taken a characteristic. Just as we do when we do an elemental bless, we first do a cleanse, and it brings them into alignment with the intent of our rituals so that we can use them like a bless. The job of the elements is not done, but the bless part is. Later, he will use elements and call them forth to actually do the creating. And here's where we come into Platonic solids. These are going to be an important part later. Basically, Plato says all these triangular shapes of the elements, they fit together to make these three-dimensional shapes. And with the different combinations of these three-dimensional shapes, everything, including souls and gods and everything, is creative. So you can tell these are not matter. That's not concrete matter. This is like something above even the type of energy that we have here in our physical universe. When the Greeks were thinking of elements, they weren't thinking H2O. If you and I were to look at an ice cube and a glass of water, we'd be thinking, oh, that's H2O because we live past the age of enlightenment. But they didn't get that. They thought, oh, this is liquidy. It has the characteristic of being liquidy. There's lots of the element of water present in this stuff right here in the little droplets. And that makes them liquidy so they flow. But if fire particles move out of that, in can come the earth elements, and all those particles will make this hard like ice. It's like it possesses them. It's a force that possesses the matter. And then if fire comes back in, it can turn liquidy because the earth is vacating it. If you get a lot of fire, even the water will kind of vacate it, and the air will come more into it, and it rises up and becomes misty. So it's not like a chemistry as much as a divine possession that makes transformation. And that's very like the code in the Matrix. In the Matrix, Neo takes one of the pills, and the code goes into him and changes him. In the cake, there's code that the woman in the restaurant eats, and she eats the cake, and the code goes into her, and she's transformed and becomes lusty. So lustiness has moved into her. The cookie that the oracle gives Neo, it has the code in it, and he eats it, and it goes into him, and he's changed. In more modern times, we call this elements pure. We're not talking about the physical elements, we're talking about the energetic elements. We're going through this because all of these principles are like underpinnings of the story that we also see in our magical practice. When we call the elements, and we're calling the elements pure, Sometimes you might wonder, why does a ceremonial magician go into a room and call the elements and he's far away from nature? Well, he's calling the elements pure. And so he's going to summon that pure energy of it into his ritual circle so he can apply it to the core working of the ritual and cause transformation. I looked at that and I thought, well, yeah, all those things in the Timaeus, they really speak to the underpinnings of magical principles in Wicca. And even here, soon we'll come up with Plato putting forth the hierarchy of elements. You'll see that still, too, in the expression of the pentacle we have here. In Timaeus, he says, in order to create the universe, things had to be physical and they had to be tangible. That comes from Timaeus. Down here, you'll see fire over here and earth here, closer to the earth. Up here is the spirit. Well, how do you get them to stick together? You need to have a mediating principle, which is air and water. The air and the water are in the middle because it's sticking the whole mix together so that they can join and move and create. If we are tracing the pentacle, if you start at spirit into matter, which is earth, and then you go up to water, which is the next least dense thing, over to air, over here, which is the next least dense thing, over to fire, and up into spirit. It's all in the order of the hierarchy of elements, even today. And that comes from Plato's Timaeus. It's in that story. I thought, well, this is really like our ritual circle too, because you have the fire up here, the earth down here, you've got air and water sticking them together in the middle, and we're mediating our consciousness between the physical realm and the spiritual realm. So I wanted to follow this up, okay? I started to suspect, what does this story, Timaeus, have to do with our craft? And I looked through all kinds of ancient texts. Agrippa is one of them. And yeah, he's talking about the elements and elementals. Paracelsus also, you see it there. This is my Golden Dawn slide. The Golden Dawn went and assigned cardinal directions to the elements. So up until the Golden Dawn assigned them, they didn't have them assigned in this way. Eliphas Levi, he did also assign cardinal directions. He put elementals into the cardinal directions, but they weren't in the same order. That's how you get the circles flipped upside down. So you've got Earth up towards the North Pole in this hemisphere and fire down below. Still, I did not see an entry point. So I continued and looked through all these organizations from the 1600s up into the 1900s, and I couldn't find a transmittal point. Yes, definitely there's an influence there. I mean, this seemed to be an important place of information that influenced magical practice. But where's the myth? Let's go pick up our main character at the sidebar and continue the myth. At this point, it becomes a horror story. It's really bad because of this. It's not just math, you guys. It's this. It's this kind of math. Really, it's bad. So why math? Well, in the Timaeus, numbers and math are the basis of the universe. He put together the universe, this craftsman did, based upon mathematical calculations. And get a load of this. These are the mathematical calculations. If you read the book, if you read Timaeus, it isn't even all nicely printed out in numbers for you. It's in these paragraphs of word problems. And some nice person, a professor, put these together for us in how to make a soul in the Timaeus. And I really appreciate that. What does all this mean? What did he do to make the world soul? Down here, you're going to see at the very bottom the feistiest stuff. And this is the indivisible different and the divisible different. Keyword different. Different means that it changes. And it's the most different from the source, the good, because it has a higher capacity for change. And source does not change. Up above that, you've got things that are associated with being and sameness. That is your tip-off, that these are going to be the ingredients that correspond and are going to be placed in the formation of the universe closest to the outer rings of the universe. He mixes up 3 different mixtures and he puts each one in a bowl. And then he mixes those together. this bottom stuff is really feisty, and he has to use persuasion. He has to persuade necessity to get these to go mixing in with the things that are up here. So you're going to see this over and over again. What do you do to get the things up high to mix into the physical world? Also, elements are part of the mixture. So all the elements, they are in that mixture already. So this is the first portion of him actually invoking the elements to put them into use so that they can be used to create the world soul and make the physical world. So they are invoked as a creative force at this point. So then he takes the mixture and he pours it all out. And then he pounds it out and he laminates it so it's nice and even and perfect. After he spreads it out, he divides it. Now he calls this top portion the same and the bottom portion different. But it's all the same and the different is all mixed in there because that's the point, to blend this together to make the world soul so he can make the universe. But this top portion is going to make the outer ring of the universe. And the part that he is labeled different is reserved for the inner ring. So that's what that is all about. It took me a while to figure that out. And then he's going to cut that bottom band into more parts. Now, there's math here. What is this math? This math corresponds to the harmonic scales as they would have understood it back in that time. That's what the math is all about. So when he puts this together, it's not only going to be like a clock and it's going to keep time, it's going to be like a music box. So he takes the strip of same and the strip of different and he crosses them. And then he bends them around so that they touch. And he fastens them with rivets right here and here, which allows them to be able to spin and to turn. And then down at the bottom here, he's reserved these to make rings that go on the inside. So we've got 3 parts of a circle here. You notice we do a circle 3 times around. This is going to be continuing and showing in other magical practices from that time forward. Those 3 strips he will be making into the inner rings, and he's going to hang the planets on them. And that's how that comes together. This circle of same is going to be closest to the source. And so it's going to catch its emanations and it's going to cause it to vibrate. It's going to bring all of that into the center. And the gyrations of the inside are going to spin and move, and it's going to vibrate, and it's going to hit that ring of different, which is the mediating principle, and bring that vibration out to the circle of same so that whatsoever in eternity can hear and listen what's going on here. He created the circle of same, and in it, he populated the stars, and there would be a star for every human soul that is made. And that is the celestial realm. And then on the inside, he put the circle of different. And that circle would be in charge of the 7 wandering stars. And that's their orbits. He hangs the planets on each one of them. And so that circle of different is in charge of the 7 wandering princes. And those planets correspond to deities and gods. So the gods have been invoked at this point. We have got the invocation of the elements and the invocation of the gods. And so the gods were created to provide omens and portents. And in comes the earthly realm. So now we've got a celestial realm, we've got the realm of the gods and the planets, and we've got an earthly realm. And those are the 3 spheres that are involved here. Everything is centered around the earth. The earth is going to be the place of the core working. And the invocation of the gods is accomplished. There's now 3 parts of the circle. We have a trinity. And interestingly enough, this is where the idea of the Trinity came in Christianity. It's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Father is the God, the Son is the earthly one, and the Spirit is the mediating principle. The elements were part of the primordial mixture, so they were already invoked. And the love and strife is in there, the polarity. In a Wiccan ritual, I think this polarity, in my opinion, is expressed in the Lord and the Lady. So what have we got? We've got a 3-part circle cast, an elemental blessed with pre-existing elements. Through the elements in the circle, we summon the elemental powers. We have summoned the greater and lesser gods and spiritual creatures in that godly realm. And here's a big question I have. Remember, as a new person learning Wicca, you may have asked, well, why do we call the gods last? The answer I always got is we have to pretty the place up before they come. And my thought in the back of my head was, well, I'm not quite satisfied. In most Western myths, or in many Western myths, the gods were present and oversaw the creation of the universe. Why wouldn't they want to be there and oversee the creation of the circle? My thought is, well, we call them, I suspect at this point, if we are going in the order of the Timaeus and we are the craftsmen, and then we've just called everything in that order, the next thing we're going to call is the gods. But it doesn't show transmission yet. There's a similarity, but it doesn't show transmission of the myth. The myth has got to get to Gardner. Here's an underlying principle that matches. He says, the soul was thus woven together with the body from the center on out to the outer limits of heaven. And what he goes on to say is this is why like recognizes like. It's because we have the God chip, the divinity chip inside of us. We have the God code inside of us. And therefore, when we hear truth, when we see something like a soul or a spirit or something of that nature, that's why we can recognize it, because it's in us. Here we have the harmony. The body of the universe was visible and the soul was invisible, both shared in reason and harmony. So everything is woven together because of the vibrations. I think when many of us do magic, we describe it as feeling the vibrations of different things in the universe. Now I thought, well, this is very interesting. The 3-part circle, can I follow this up through time and find where it meets Gardner? Is that a possibility, where the myth itself will meet Gardner? Over here we've got a 3-part circle. The colors are not showing really well, but this section right here, and this diagram, it was made by Ptolemy. So we're already from Plato's era up into 100 CE. This is one of many examples of showing the 3-part circle still in play. The middle part is the earthly realm. This area out here is still showing the planets, the godly realm. This area right here is still showing the celestial realm and all the stars. And out here, these words translated say, the dwelling of God and all the selected, which, if you go into the meanings of that, it corresponds to eternity, which we've already seen Plato create in Timaeus. Up in the 1600s, there's Robert Flood. We're still going strong with that 3-part circle with the center as earthly. Then we've got the planetary and the gods. Then we've got the celestial realm. So it's coming up further. This is an image that I photographed from a book, Wicca Magical Beginnings. I want you to forgive me my notes. I didn't know I was going to be photographing, so I wrote in it. I was busy translating the symbols, and I'm only part way through there. But over here, this is a diagram from High Magic's Aid that Gardner wrote. It's a work of fiction he wrote. At that time, practicing witchcraft was still illegal. So he published a work of fiction, and in it, the characters show how to do magic. And this bears striking similarities that this was called out by the authors of Wicca Magical Beginnings. The god names are the same. He has changed some of it. He's taken away the square, which if you take a circle and squares together, that often means the circle is divinity. The square means the earthly realm or man. It means divinity into man, divinity into the physical universe. And I'm going to suggest that it holds true and still means that in this. So he's dropped the square, he's maintained the circles, and if you look in here, he's put the altar over here. And this is the triangle of the art that Solomon used to summon spirits into and trap them. So he would put that on the outside of your circle so that if you invoked a spirit that was a little iffy, you could put him in that triangle. Thus, out here, these words translated are different names of God. And I want to tell you, too, just because so you understand, the magical practitioners during that time were Christians. So our magic came up from pre-Christianity, up through Christians, but also up through the Arabic world, where it came through and re-entered into the Western world. That's why you see a lot of Christianity in this. It translates to 3 names of God. This is Mikael, the power of Michael the angel, and inside that's where you would trap the demon. This over here is a rug that you can buy online, but it just happens to have the same symbol, and I thought it would be easier for you to see. I'm going to take a moment because I want to go over the meaning of this circle. It's obvious in here, this is north, south, east, west. That refers to the physical world. But what do these symbols here mean? Okay, this one I thought was going to mean elements because that's a common symbol in medieval and Renaissance times for elements. Oh, but this is Toph right here. It's not going to mean elements. It's going to mean Toph, I think. I'm just saying that I think. So this is the Hebrew letter Tav. And this is, in early Hebrew, the same symbol was used for Tav. It's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The Hebrew alphabet during the Renaissance was considered to be the magical language. Why was it the magical language? Well, Latin was the language of scholars. Hebrew was coming in from the East and it was more exotic. And it also, the Hebrew language, there's a story of creation associated with every single letter. It starts with the first one, which is the word or the first breath of God. And each letter has a part in creation, ending with the last letter, which is the final letter, and the creation has happened. And it's often called the seal. It is a union between God, a contract between God and human beings. And so therefore, all the energy of the creation is flowed down into the physical universe, and we are connected to that. Here you've got Toph, and I believe it's a mediating circle just outside here. And what is this? These are written in Hebrew. These are various names of God. I do have theories about the other symbols, but I don't know if we have time for that. Still doing 3-part circles. Gardner was involved in that. Still not showing transmission yet, just a similarity, and that things from this story would have come up through time. We've got these parts covered in the Wiccan ritual format. We still have to cover the core working and the raising of the energy and the great rite and cakes and ale. Man hasn't been made. Making human beings is the core working of the myth. The craftsman has a little bit left over from making the universe. It isn't as pure, it isn't as high grade as the rest of the stuff, but he does have some left. So following the same formula, he creates the mixture to make human beings. But he's only making the soul portion because he wants to reserve that portion for himself, and he's going to give the body job to another group. So he mixes it together, and he creates the soul, and he makes as many souls as there are stars in the sky, because by the myth, when human beings evolve enough, when we've learned enough, we can go back to our star, and that's where we're going to be. We each have a guiding star. And then he takes and he sows the souls into the cosmos and into the celestial realm. So we'll always be connected to this web, this underlying energetic web of the universe. And like will always know like. And then he hands it off to the Greek gods and says, hey, make a body for this. At this point, we can see that man has been made in the same process, kind of in the same image, therefore, as the whole universe, which has been made in the image of this emanating good, source of good. We have a core working, humans are made, raising of energy, I'm going to suggest it's done by the turning of the cosmos to which humans are sewn into. They're sewn into those stars. And the whole process, the turning of this, generates energy. The great rite, love and strife. The elements themselves are enjoined in love and strife. That's what creates the universe and creates the motion, is the union and the separating, and the union and the separating of the elements. And if that isn't enough of a great rite, this symbol, the triangle that is pointing upwards, it symbolizes man reaching upwards towards the celestial divinity. This triangle that is facing downwards is God or divinity down into matter or man. And so the two are one. And we have a joining of the heavens and the earth in the body and as the body of man. And that is a great rite. This does show correlation. We've got all the parts, but it doesn't show a transmission, because correlation is not the transmission. So I was sad. I was sad because it's like I had searched everywhere, reaching back through history, all the way through medieval and Renaissance and modern times, trying to find where this myth of Timaeus, which actually the myth continues, but that's the parts we're going to continue, but it's all about the making of the body. I couldn't find where it intersects Gardner. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to give up. And I'm just going to keep all of this to myself, and I'm not going to tell anybody, because I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was talking about. Then I thought, wait a minute. I was always looking from way in the past, going forward. What if I started in the present and I went backwards? And then I realized we've got to pick these guys back up at the sidebar and take a look at these guys. So I went back and I looked at Masonry. Remember this card about the Masons we talked about, where they started out as Masons and they then became a speculative group? What were the books that they were studying from? Well, I will tell you, the books that they had for math had the philosophers in them. Here's an example of a book. And I'm not going to say that name because that's complicated, but it's a 1521 Italian edition, originally written between 30 and 20 BC. Why were they using that book as a textbook? That has philosophy in it because it has math. It has math. That's what they learned their math from. So that's why it was so easy for the Masons to make that group from being Masons into a philosophical organization, because they already had the textbooks. Now let's look further at the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and take a look at all three of those founding members that created. They were Masons, and they weren't just fly-by Masons. They were very experienced, well-trained Masons. And they were the founders of the Golden Dawn. And Crowley, he also was trained to the 33rd degree. And Gerald Gardner, he was a Mason. He was a master Mason. And he joined the Masons when he was 25 years old. So where could I find this myth? We still don't have transmission yet. I have to show that they knew that myth and that it was part of what they would have been familiar with. So where in Masonry can I find this? Well, I looked around and there's lots of correlations, like their tools have symbols and meanings. Our tools have symbols and meanings. They both teach lessons. They call Masonry the craft, we call the craft the craft. They have a 3-degree system, we have a 3-degree system. So mote it be, that term came from the Masons. There's the term Cowan, comes from the Masons, people who have not been initiated yet. Both come from Masonry. In the early days of Masonry, they would move clockwise in their spaces. And that may have been just because the spaces were so small, but they still moved clockwise. We have cakes and ale. They had a festive board that they did after their rituals. Also, in Triumph of the Moon, written by Ronald Hutton, Masonry is seen as helpful in providing the structure of Wicca. So I'm seeing lots of correlations, but where's the myth? I ran across this article, and it's called The Influence of Plato's Republic on Freemasonry and the Masonic Ritual. And here it says, in Timaeus, we're getting the word, Timaeus, Plato relates a story concerning the destruction of knowledge by 2 natural elements. These are identical to the ones referred to by Josephus, and which appear in the earliest documents of Freemasonry, fire and water. It also says, in emulation ritual, we have a very artistic allusion to this story from Timaeus and to Joseph's account of the 2 pillars. Now, is this transmittal? Well, I don't think we have it yet, because that particular piece of writing, it was speculative. He was talking about, to me, it seemed like those are his ideas about connections. So we don't have a positive confirmation. Okay, then I came across this publication, one of the many, I can't tell you how many publications I went through, but there's this one that I'm showing you, The Platonic Solids, a Description, written in 2010. It's like a ceremony with questions and answers. And a question is asked, how did the solids, which are the Platonic solids, those come from Timaeus, they do not come from any other place. How did the solids come into Freemasonry? Answer, they are referred to in a lecture on the second degree by William Preston, considered to be the father of Masonic Masonry. Question, what is the earliest reference to the solids? Answer, in the year 1810, when they are included in the Iowa version of Preston's lecture. Question, how did the solids come to be associated with the Royal Arch, which is a type of masonry? Answer, they are included in a revision in 1834, where a short reference is made to them in the symbolic lecture. This is still not transmission. If you look at the year, this is in 1834. Okay, they hadn't codified masonry yet. So they had a lot of different things going on. You couldn't say that any of this material that they're referring to would have been known by everybody. So the distribution is not broad enough. Then I got to Perfect Ceremonies of the Supreme Order of the Holy Royal Arch Degree, published in 1880. At this time, they were making codified ceremonies that would be replicated and done by all the Masonic lodges. They wanted to standardize things so that what was a first, second, and third degree would be the same for other lodges. And so it is at this point that this publication, in which the Platonic solids appear and are part of ritual and are attributed to the Timaeus, that we have an actual ritual that became part of Masonry and would have been experienced by all of the aforementioned members of the Golden Dawn and Gerald Gardner. So at this point, we can be really pretty darn certain that Gerald Gardner had already participated in rituals inspired by the Timaeus long before the ritual format for Wicca. We have transmission.
Yay!
Here we have all of our collection of people who knew of the Timaeus having a drink at the sidebar. So is there still a question? Yeah, I think there could be a question. We don't have a paper where Gerald Gardner said, hey, I'm telling everybody for posterity's sake that I based the ritual Wiccan format off the Timaeus. We don't have that. So we'll never have that degree of certainty. But I do think that we have proved enough here that it is worthy of further inspection. And I really invite all of you to give scrutiny to this. In a scientific community, that's what they do. They come up with their ideas and their findings and they put them forward and they say, hey, participate in this. Check again, see what you can find. And you, all of you people, as far as I know, you're the first people to share in this idea because I haven't found it anywhere else. If any of you are interested in participating in fleshing this out, I was thinking from the Magical Growth Facebook site, maybe opening up a little room called Magical Growth What If, or Magical Growth at the Core. And if you have ideas and things that you find, please go ahead to that site and put them in and participate. I would love to hear from you. I think we're at the time. We're at the time. Thank you. Thank you.